Hello and welcome to another hand drink solo wine info video, and today we are discussing the City on a Hill Tinta Barocca 2020, made by winemaker André Bruyns. André Bruyns is a man who has that classic superhero vibe about him. During the day he is mild-mannered, with a dialed-back persona replete with unassuming attire. He also has a charming low-level visual impairment by the presence of spectacles, a classic disguise, and his look is finished off with an unthreatening boyish grin. Now when one puts this all together and stirs in the fact that he also spent time training under winemaking legend David Sadi from David and Nadia Wines, you'll see that you'd be an idiot not to assume that there is something super phantasmic beneath the surface. As it turns out, in the case of André Bruyns and City on a Hill wines, it was in fact not a bionic arm or laser vision, but instead a rather incredible range of wines that is well worth exploring. So in this video, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about the City on a Hill range of wines, then we'll discuss what the wine is like in the glass, and finally, we'll talk about why South African Tinta Barocca is a very exciting prospect for the entire world of wine. City on a Hill Wines is a member of the Swartland Independent Producers, which means that for winemaker André Bruyns, there are a whole bunch of practices that he can and cannot employ in his cellar. Now, I will let you read more about those stipulations on the Swartland Independent Producers website. But the thin end of the situation is that, first of all, he has to work entirely with Swartland fruit. He also works exclusively with spontaneous fermentation and native yeasts, and also chooses cultivars that have already shown their ability to thrive in the rather dry, hot, and harsh conditions of the Swartland. His chosen list of cultivars include grapes like Syrah, Chenin Blanc, Grenache Noir, Grenache Blanc, and of course, Tinta Barocca. Now, this list is highly pertinent to our discussion right now because Hand Drink Solo is in the middle of an exploration of South Africa's climate change cultivars. And what is a climate change cultivar, you might ask? Well, it's a cultivar that in South Africa will continue to produce world-winning wines, even as the Cape Winelands continues to get hotter and drier as it is predicted to do. Because it's no good just having vines and cultivars that can survive in a tough environment, but make wines that taste like a butt.
Oh, hell no!
We need cultivars that can thrive in the increasingly dry environment that is the Cape Winelands and still produce impeccable wines. Which brings me to the topic of what this wine is like in the glass. Now, the nose on this guy is not astronomical, but perhaps what it lacks in extroversion, it really does make up for in complexity, because it manages to express three quite distinct categories of aromas, which is fruit, spice, and candy. So up front, there's the fairly prominent red fruit elements of cherry and raspberry. But then beneath that, there's also some slightly deeper blackcurrant fruit pastel elements. And then to top it all off, there's some delightfully sweet and savory, spicy notes of red licorice and some allspice. Now on the palate, this guy presents a little bit like Rhys Ifans from The Replacement, because he's wiry. Those lovely, bright, fresh cherry notes are wrapped in some rather rugged tannins. But as it unfolds in the glass, that initially wiry red cherry element
Wiry. It's wiry. No, it's wiry.
broadens into a more generous sort of red plum note that is then accompanied by the richer blackcurrant fruit pastel, which we initially smelt on the nose. In my mind, the balance between structure and fruit on this wine is just right. But for the tannin averse amongst you, this is definitely a wine that will silken up over time in your cellar. When it comes to the winemaking, André Bruyns keeps everything rather simple, as is the custom with the Swartland Independent Producers. Because Tinta Barocca is a cultivar that has a naturally high pH, he keeps the whole bunch components to a minimum. After that, it really is no acid added, native ferment only, and only old oak used in the maturation process. Tinta Barocca is a Portuguese cultivar in origin. It's used mostly in the north of the country, in the Douro Valley, where it is vinified and then blended in the production of port. Now, there are two things that we can take away from this observation. First of all, is that it's used almost exclusively in the production of fortified wines, but also it's seen as an almost also-ran blending component that is deemed inferior to cultivars like Tinta Roriz, which is Tempranillo, or Touriga Franca. So it's not even appreciated in its own right, in its home country. But why is this relevant? Well, it's relevant because despite being a Portuguese cultivar, South Africa is one of the few countries in the world where the potential of Tinta Barocca as a table wine is realized, as it's not only used to produce fortified wines, but also some rather jolly good single cultivar bottlings. We have some of our finest winemakers like Adi Bardenos or Eben Sadi using old vine blocks, dry land farmed, to produce some rather incredible wines. Their work in turn triggers and inspires the imaginations of young winemakers like André Bruyns in order to see how they can further enhance the expression of Tinta Barocca in South Africa. The end result is an entire group of South African winemakers who are committed to showing the world a side of Tinta Barocca that perhaps would have never been realized if the grape had stayed at home as the black sheep, perpetually being marked down for what it wasn't rather than being celebrated for what it is. Well, that's all we have time for today. But if you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the Hand Drink Solo Wine Info channel, where we make at least 6 videos each month talking about wine history, wine science, unusual cultivars, and some of the rising winemaking stars coming out of the South African winelands.